This is Ryan McGowan, and you're listening to Monday Night Football.
Good evening, and welcome to Monday Night Football. This is going to be a wee bit different. We're going to improvise.
We're going to be on time.
We are, definitely. That is unquestionable today. But we're going to improvise a wee bit as we go here, because we are a wee bit short in the panel department so far. We will have representation from both sides, but Mikey is a wee bit delayed at this moment in time, so we will cover for him in the meantime.
The buses.
So what I thought we would do anyway, Ross, the plan was to do this when we had a full panel, but it makes sense to do it now. Given that we've no guest today, and for the next couple of weeks we're going to try and settle into a stricter format where we keep it tight. We're to the hour, and it's more a discussion here, and then we're going to start to bring the interviews back in, but possibly in a slightly different fashion, just to keep all the listeners in the loop. But what I want to do is get a wee bit more of our personalities across, but also actually allow people to connect to us a wee bit. So,
well, I don't know if the listeners will like my personality, but we'll try. We'll go with it.
That's true, but they didn't have to like it. I mean, they can attack you on Twitter as easily as they can praise you. So, what's your Twitter address if people want to get in touch with you, Ross?
It's at RAS. Sorry, it's at Roscoe _co, but I'll spell it for you. RAWS _KO. But what you'll find on there at the moment is I've just released a single on Friday, so it'll just be a lot of music stuff, but I do talk about football as well.
It'll be Ross plugging up a storm for the next month or so.
Yeah, pretty much.
But just so, I want us to be contactable. I want people to be able to get in touch with us, and like I say, maybe praise us for certain views or challenge other views or just stimulate discussion away from the show as well. So if anyone wants to get in touch with me specifically, if they want to volunteer their services for the show, if they've got suggestions of how we can improve things, I run the Monday Night Football official Twitter, so get in touch with me at MNFitba, FITBA. Likewise, we're all on the Facebook, so if you want to get in touch, then get on facebook.com/Monday Night Football. Again, FITBA. Like we say, we're always looking for guests or people to join the panel on an ongoing basis, so get in touch.
Yeah.
Right, Ross, we had an opening question for this week. We've got answers. After the Hearts game at the weekend, it left us to stew a wee bit on how sore it was. I think some people overreacted maybe slightly because of the pain, and it made me think that a decent opening question for today's show would be a defeat that has hurt you the most, or a defeat that has deflated you the most, or that's left you the most affected afterwards. What game would you reflect on from that perspective?
Thinking about it, it's probably going to be quite a popular one for the Hearts fans, but it was the League Cup final against St Mirren. After the Hearts Hibs final, we obviously beat them 5-1. The rest is history. But leading into the St Mirren final, I was counting my chickens. I was in Nando's. That's how many chickens I was counting. It was getting to the stage where the name was on the trophy straight away for me. I just need to turn up and watch it. And then when we went 1-0 up, I was standing right next to Jim Jeffries while he was kind of behind us. And I looked back at him, he smiled at me, just the stars aligned. I was thinking, right, okay, that's it. Straight away, St Mirren win the game. It was the worst train journey home in my life, probably. We were all looking at each other, just like, what's happened? I know it's the League Cup final, but considering who we had, we really should have won. And it affected me quite more than it should have anyway.
Did it matter to you specifically that it was St Mirren? Because we're too young to remember that whole affair in 1986, but I know that despite that, there's still an atmosphere.
Well, to me, St Mirren is not a massive kind of issue for me, because my granddad was a St Mirren fan. Believe it or not, Hector Nicol, the guy who wrote the Hearts song, the Hibs song, he was a St Mirren fan. And not a lot of people know that. Everyone thinks he supports Hearts. He doesn't. He supports St Mirren. So it was a time when, we weren't born at that time, so it was something that it passed us by, and it's never really affected me in terms of people singing at games and stuff, and the Dundee fans singing at games as well, Albert Kidd and this and that. It's before my time. It's never going to affect me. league's titles before that have probably had more effect on me, like the one during the war that we should have won. That's more of a kind of point for me to be upset about than the 80s one. That was our own fault.
Okay. Going to the audience for a moment, we had a few responses to this question on Twitter. Craig Leach, who is a Hibbie, he asked for us to bend the rules ever so slightly for him, which I obliged when I saw the game. So he was saying, apart from the obvious, does the 4-4 Derby game count? It felt like a defeat. So I said, would make special exceptions for that one, because there's no too many games that match the circumstances of that. So
understandable, definitely.
Yeah. So he then said, as a 9-year-old, I was gutted. So I think really just wanted to point out that he's even younger than us to an extent. But he said, top 3 would be that game, the cup final, and last season against Hamilton. So the fact that, that 4-4 was a New Year derby, but it was still just a fairly bog standard league derby, as bog standard as they get, and yet the circumstances that played out, the way the draw came about, that's managed to make its way onto Craig's top 3 list.
To be honest though, I think what has become more and more of an issue with the Hibs fans is it was 4-4, fair enough, but it was Graham Weir.
Yeah. It almost would have softened the blow if he had gone on to have the career that, say, Stephen Fletcher has.
Yeah, if it was like Rudy Scatchell or whatever had done it, it'd become even more of a hate figure. But it was Graham Weir.
Yes. Right, Ross, do you want to go and let Mikey in so we can get some Hibs representation? And
certainly will.
Get him to brush up on his answer for this question. The other responses that we had from our listeners, and a couple of Jambo listeners suggested James Christie on Twitter. Sorry, I should say Craig Leach is at Craig Leach 18 if you want to follow him. Any Hibbies or Jambos who want to get a wee bit football banter, I'm sure Craig would be up for that. Likewise, at James Christie 2 said the second Airdrie semi-final where we lost 1-0 at Hampden, don't think we had a shot on target and Robbo was sent off. Again, I think that's slightly before Ross and I's time, that we were aware of that happening, but I don't think we would have been in attendance. Certainly I wasn't in attendance. I don't think Ross would have been at that stage. And the final one we had was Usual Suspects. This is from Jimmy McDowell. Jim McDowell 63 on Twitter. Usual Suspects for deflated defeat. St Mirren semi, Dens, Airdrie semi, but worst for me at the time was Forfar at home in the Cup, which I think is an unusual one, not necessarily one we would have expected. Mikey, what is your one from a Hibs perspective? What's the game that's left you most deflated afterwards?
I had quite a succession in my lifetime as a Hibs fan, to the point where I actually had to make a list and then try and sort of score them out of probably negative marks in terms of enjoyment levels.
Well, we've already had Craig Leach, who clearly had a top 3.
I don't know, there's different ways of measuring it as well. Obviously there's a couple of derbies that sort of stick in the craw a wee bit. So there was the 4-4 defeat at Tynecastle.
That's the one that's been mentioned already, yes.
That was a bit of a sore one. 5-1 obviously.
Yeah.
That can't really be disputed. There's no point pretending it didn't hurt. As well as that, there's a 6-6 defeat against Motherwell.
Yeah.
Not a draw, defeat.
That is quite a speciality, that draw defeat. It was perfected for a stage in time.
6-2 up, spectacular compared to 4-2 in injury time. On top of that, there was, for different reasons, AEK Athens. Like, I've never in my whole time watching Hibs experienced an atmosphere at Easter Road.
Because it was a kind of so close yet so far.
Close yet so far. We'd lost the first leg 2-0, which by rights we were out.
Yeah.
That was done already. This was like a pretty well established European side at the time. To go 2-0 up and be like well worth it as well, like really worth it. And then literally the last touch of the match, Paco Luna had a header for 7 yards out and put it wide for the hat trick, for the win, the whole lot. And then first minute extra time they scored and sort of kind of burst the bubble a wee bit. So that's probably the worst one. Another one I thought of was we played the season, got promoted again. So 99-2000 we got Aberdeen in the semi-finals of the Scottish Cup. This is the Aberdeen team that finished bottom of the league and got saved by Falkirk. Yeah. Not having the stadium for probably the umpteenth time. And we had a really good side. Latape was playing phenomenally well. Sozi was still at his best. Went 1-0 up and just blew it. Yeah, absolutely blew it.
Was that Andy Dow that scored?
It was Andy Dow.
I remember that one as a child, even.
Like a raker as well. It's a great goal, like a volley. I think it's a right-footed volley. But like that particular side, and like I think it's quite emotional for the Hibs fans because like guys like John Hughes and Pat McGinley, who've been great servants to the club, played their last matches, or it was the last big chance to win something. But I think those two are probably the worst in the sort of deflation, if you like, and being gutted. 4-4 was shell shocked. 5-1, like as soon as I went to 3 and 4, like the whole like emotion of getting beaten in the cup final was like, this is hump day, I'm leaving, basically.
Ross mentioned a wee point, just to touch back on the 4-4 for a second. Ross mentioned a wee point that he feels that the 4-4 was almost made worse by the fact that it was Graham Weir who scored the goals. Someone who's he wasn't necessarily revered at the time. He's certainly no gone on to have any sort of career.
I don't know. I think maybe Hearts fans maybe recognise it, but when the Hibs fans, to us, he was just another guy in a maroon jersey who once again stuck it up us. So he didn't have much of the fact that it was him and, like you say, a bit of a kind of sort of fringe figure didn't really make, for me personally, it was the fact that we just like managed to pull that off, to manage to chuck away a 2-goal lead in injury time.
But just to touch on exactly the same feeling probably for us with the Stuttgart game. Near the end, it came to Petric. Obviously, you want anyone else, Petric, and then he blazes it over the bar. You know, it's exactly the same feeling.
So
we won that game.
So far.
It's like, but we lost.
It's very similar.
What you pay $500,000 for, quite frankly.
Very similar to the Bayern Munich game as well that we spoke about with Gary Mackay, which again was we were only kind of 2 at the time.
Yeah.
But to beat Bayern Munich at Tynecastle, go to Bayern Munich, hit the woodwork, have an opportunity, and then they score essentially 2 wonder goals to put you out. It's a wee bit sore, I would imagine, at the time. My one to wrap up, my defeat that hurt the most, I think, again, a few of these happened when we were children, but this one happened just when I was old enough to start to fully understand it. And it came, the 5-1 in 96 was really sore, especially the circumstances, Gary Locke going off so early, and it just, you felt like there was some sort of fairy tale aspect to it, and that just dissipated so quickly. But to then get another opportunity about 5 or 6 months later at Celtic Park in the League Cup final, you felt like this was the time. We went 2-0 down, brought it back to 2-2, Stevie Fulton scored, and you thought, there's no way we don't win from here. Like, if ever we're going to do it, all the momentum's in our favour and blah, blah, blah. Fate intervened. Robertson got wiped out on the halfway line, didn't get a free kick. Gazza elbowed his way through a couple of times, 4-2, and then we got the consolation goal at the end. But I remember as a child seeing that through my eyes, but also through my old man's eyes, and him, you know, that thing of never having won a trophy in his lifetime at that stage. And, you know, he clearly, that feeling that this might actually never happen, which that was depressing for him, you know, because he fully grasped it all. But for an 11-year-old sitting there thinking, this might never happen.
Literally,
I think I was maybe actually 10, 10, just turned 10. And I'm thinking, well, that's all, you know, it's gutting that we're not going to win a trophy in your lifetime, but we're not going to win one in my lifetime. So little did I know at that stage that would all change 2 years later, but I remember being particularly gutted at that one.
I can even vividly quite remember watching that game and like first half and thinking like Hearts are well worth it. It's like first half Hearts were superb, and I must have been 11, 12 at the time going like, Hearts are scalping these now.
Yeah, that was the same with the Hibs game against Rangers when McCoy scored the all-free kick. That game, I was sitting watching that exactly the same.
It's the thing we've spoken about. I mean, there is an underlying theme as well of the maybe slightly dodgy Old Firm decisions that they get, no one else might. But there's also the thing that we've spoken about a few times this season in terms of moments of individual quality. You know, someone just coming up with a moment and you think, how is that possible? You know, you've been on the back foot for the last half an hour and they all start going at Easter Road, for example. You know, Gaza came up with kind of 2 of those moments, got Rangers out of jail, and he just felt at that point, well, the Old Firm where Celtic were just coming back, Rangers were still dominant. He felt there was always going to be one of them there to knock us down as soon as we got.
Like Frost mentioned there, like that McCoist goal, like it just had to be McCoist. Like come back for a snapped leg, 3 stone overweight. I'm sure it was his first literal minutes on the park since coming back, and he scores. He could, like, you heard the sound, like the ground like shook when he hit the ground. His big backside, and I was like, this can't be happening. This guy can't keep writing headlines like that.
Yeah. Right, what we're going to do, we're going to quickly go to just 2 adverts, and then we will come back. I think we're going to do Hibs first because we always like to accentuate the positives on this show. So we're going to discuss that, but then we'll get everyone involved throughout. There's only 3 of us. It's the small panel today, so we can all be involved throughout. We can all share our opinions on all aspects of it. Mikey, I'm sure you're going to enjoy sharing your opinions on the Hearts result. So we're going to go to the adverts now, and we'll be back shortly to discuss Hibs versus Queen of the South. a comfortable 2-0 win. And Hearts versus Falkirk, the first defeat of the league season, 3-2 at Tynecastle. Stay with us on Monday Night Football.
Radio Saltire is a community radio station located in Trinent and East Lothian. We are looking for presenters and station volunteers of all ages. So if you think you've got what it takes or always wanted to give it a go, we can train you up and give you that opportunity. So please get in touch by emailing info@radiosaltire.org or contact us using the website www.radiosaltire.org, community radio station for Scotland.
And we are back on Monday Night Football. Thank you for staying tuned to Radio Saltire. Mikey, before we go any further, Ross and I kind of pimped our Twitters slightly because we want to start getting people more involved and, able to message us and call us on our opinions and things like that. Are you willing to give out your social networking details? I know I've put you on the spot
I almost
somewhat.
never used Twitter. I can't even tell
Well,
you
you're
what
going
it
to
was.
start now. This is going to be your inspiration to use Twitter.
I have one.
Do you literally not know what it is?
I have one, but I don't think I've posted from
Right,
it.
okay, well,
It's
we'll
me
get-
to observe the MN Football information rather
okay.
than use it myself.
Well,
I will become active and I will
We'll
next
give it out by the end of this section, then
Right.
you can...
I'll have a wee nosy about it.
Yeah, okay. Right, let's talk about Hibs then. I'm a wee bit worried that there's not that much to talk about with Hibs at the moment because they seem to be very quietly and under the radar becoming a pretty effective unit.
I think that maybe not in a dissimilar way from certain Hearts performances earlier in the season, where obviously Hearts had quite a few high scoring victories, but then there was those games where it wasn't flashy and it was job done, which were these kind of performances that people say are the sign of champions. Obviously I think we've left that kind of a wee bit late to sort of perhaps be tagged as that, but it was good to see us, I think, sort of get a monkey off our back of dealing with one of the smaller but stronger sides. Especially at the upper backside. I think they could have possibly gone above us, depending on the result on Saturday. So it was really, really notable that we managed to get that victory. And again, it wasn't relying on Scott Allen, for example, who didn't particularly affect the game. Tried a few things, didn't quite come off for him, but it was a good team performance. And there was, obviously we're doing it without a number of players at the moment, like quite key players. So other guys are stepping up and doing a good job. And it might be that having those key players out is stopping us winning with a certain pizzazz or flair, but it's good to see us do it in those kind of sort of crucial matches that really matter just now. Rangers game obviously got postponed, which gave us another opportunity to just put a wee bit of fear up them, and not all round can't complain at all. Really, really good not going to say performance, it wasn't a really good performance. It was a efficient performance, but a really, really important result.
Okay, it's a very telling point that you make there, I think, about the fact that this was a real significant game, a potential banana skin, and Hibs came through unscathed and actually relatively comfortable in the end. With that in mind, psychologically, how huge is that, not just for the players but for the fans, that you're now thinking, we didn't have to, like, the Falkirk game was a wee bit of a throwback a couple of weeks ago, and we've now seen with Hearts that it puts that in context a wee bit, but it did
absolutely
flash back to old Hibs with getting your fingers burned, because maybe inadequacies at the back or not killing teams off when you have the opportunity. How positive was it for you that this was just job done?
It was fantastic. I don't think anyone envisaged Hibs going there and doing a 3-4-0. Or not playing that kind of football. To go to Queen of the South, who have done a real superb job the last few seasons, becoming quite an established championship side, always kind of on the fringes of it. I don't think we're going to go there and have that kind of performance. Like, they play with wingers and they've got good attacking players, so I think they had to sort of set up in a certain fashion to respect that. The way you switched to fullbacks, I think, was definitely to combat that. But it was good to see us going with a professional mindset, and then when it went 2-0, like, it was making changes to protect that result. I think with Falkirk in mind, having dropped a 3-1 lead, brought Forster on, but it wasn't for another defender, it was to shore things up at the back a wee bit and give us extra protection. And I think it was happy to go, right, we're 2-0 up, we're going to win 2-0, and just shut up shop and see it out. So it was good to see that different type of mentality. The players clearly believed that they were capable of holding out on that result, even though they had kind of chucked it a wee bit a few weeks beforehand. And again, for the supporters, I think we're now going in there believing that we can beat anybody in the division, whereas previously, early in the season, away to Queen of the South, we'll be like, we'll take the draw and we'll try and do the job at home. But now it's got to the point where we believe we can go to Tynecastle or Ibrox or places like Palmerston and go, right, we could and should win by rights. So it's a good change in mentality over not that massive a number of weeks either. It's been, I think that mood was maybe just there, kind of simmering under, but now there is a belief that we can beat anybody, whilst not maybe having the sort of big results that were backed up a lot of Hearts fans' claims at the start of the season when it was 4-0, 5-1, this kind of performance. It's a belief we'll win, full stop, not necessarily a barnstormer.
It was interesting to see that Forster substitution, because it was actually something that Stubbs did the week before against Cowdenbeath as well. It was brought on and you thought it was a weird substitution at that point when you were 4 or 5-0 up, but it did actually show that he was potentially just seeing if it worked for use in the future. Absolutely. When maybe it would be required. It was interesting to see that. While we're on the subject of the Cowdenbeath game, I know that possibly making the mistakes of reading reviews of the show, I know that a couple of people mentioned that we maybe weren't as effusive with praise as we could have been at Hibs last week because of their win. But from my perspective, it was purely tempered by the fact that Cowdenbeath were rubbish. Cowdenbeath presented nothing of a threat against, and Hibs were entirely comfortable, even so comfortable that they could stop playing for about 45 minutes in the middle of the game and still be in no
Callum Booth
danger.
and Lewis Stevenson scored
well, that was the
joking
thing.
Aside, it was kind of becoming slightly comical towards the end.
I just felt that Hibs did use the opportunity to conserve a wee bit of energy and just they weren't. It wasn't hell for leather. This game, on the other hand, we know that Queen of the South are a good side, and there was evidence of it in the first 20-25 minutes.
Absolutely.
It was very similar to Hearts' game at Dumfries, where Hearts had to ride a storm for half an hour. They hit the woodwork from a set piece, which funnily enough is exactly what happened here. And it, like you say, that Hearts' first game in Dumfries was looked at as being, well, that's the sign of champions. Hibs are now picking up the same results, but it's just the context that is different. I think because they're now happening 5 months on from when, if they had happened earlier in the season, we'd be talking about this completely differently.
I think maybe Hibs fans are viewing it in the context of the type of result that may see us past Rangers. Like you say, we can't talk about it being a sort of champions performance in the context that where we're sitting. So unless this Hearts result leads to some kind of astounding collapse, it's not going to be something that is a catalyst to us winning automatic promotion, but it could well be the catalyst and the belief in the players that we are going to go past Rangers, we're going to stay past them. If we get them in a playoff, we're going to beat them, and that's the mentality they need to take on. Hopefully that result just sort of kind of sticks that in the mind, because they knew that they could raise their game for Rangers and raise their game for Hearts. They've been some of our best performances this season, but were they able to raise their games for the other important matches, the teams that are just on the other side of us? And prior to this we hadn't. I think we'd taken 1 point off Queen of the South in 2 games. Falkirk had been a disaster as well for us this season, so to me that's like them showing their hand a wee bit, going like we're psychologically a different group of players from what's been at Hibs for the last few seasons. So I think that was one of the more important statements that was made by that result.
I think that the big worry, you're spot on in terms of the points that Hibs had accumulated from these types of games previously, and I think the big worry that was there was also that when Hibs had gained a point, it almost felt like at times it was because the other team had come and played for a point. Certainly I know that there was questions about Wraith Rovers doing that. I think Queen of the South at points did that and actually went away from their normal game plan just to come and say, well, we'll take a point here, and Hibs weren't able to break them down. That's why this was absolutely massive. Is that how Hibs' season shapes up now? Is it simply a case of looking at it game by game and thinking, what would we expect Rangers to get here, or what did Rangers get here in the last round of fixtures? For example, we know it was live on telly, we all watched it, we know that Rangers were significantly outclassed when they last went to Dumfries and were beaten 2-0. Is it simply a case of that night, almost similar to the position Hearts are in, trying to keep their lead, but you're looking at it saying, well, there's no guarantee they'll win in Dumfries. We go and win there, it's a big marker. Likewise, the game at Ibrox is coming up in a couple of weeks. There's another 3 points there. Mm-hmm. Is it simply just laying those markers down as we go now?
It is. On the flip side, they're a basket case, and you can't predict where they're going to drop their points. And if they're going to start scratching out some 1-0 wins and have this, no one likes us, we don't care mentality, and sort of batten down the hatches a wee bit and start picking up points that we maybe expect them to drop. So going places like Palmerston, and next time they'll go and get a 1-0 victory. So I would love to believe that we can identify games and look, you can go, right, I think they'll drop points there and drop points there, but I don't think we're completely out of that context as well just yet. We're still capable of dropping a couple of points here and there, so I don't want us to start getting overly sort of confident and excited. We've possibly still got 1 or 2 fun results in us, but far less likely than I think maybe 6-8 weeks ago, whereas I think that things could potentially get worse for Rangers, especially if we put the heat on them, winning our next couple of games. I think the second one of which is against them, which dependent, I think that we can go above them at that point, because I think they're out of action with the Celtic game.
Yeah, they don't play for the next 2 weeks.
That match takes on huge significance, massive significance. Because we could be right up their backside going to Ibrox.
Well, I mean,
confident.
Hibs sit 2 points off Rangers now. There's 2 games in hand there, but as you say, with Rangers, the basket case that they are, it would be amiss of us to look at those as points gained. You have to look at those as games in hand, and who knows what will happen there.
The mental position of both sets of players is so far apart just now. Like, Hibs must be playing with huge confidence. The guys believe that they'll beat anybody at the moment that's put up in front of them. And I don't think there's possibly a guy in the Rangers squad who feels like that just now, and we have to prey on that and put the heat on them, and every time they've got a match, let's have already put the points on the board, and make them make mistakes, and then it's down to the matches against them directly.
And in those matches there's the scope to play on the PTSD of the 2 previous meetings, and try and very quickly get them having flashbacks to that. Let's focus in on personnel from the weekend then. Were there any standout players for you, anyone who's up their game? Scott Robertson sticks out as being someone who continues his vast improvement in form.
Definitely. He's I think he's now not having to just define himself in that holding role. He scored 3 goals in the month of January, I think, or including the Rangers game, with bursting runs that we thought was the Scott Robertson that we were signing a couple of seasons ago. So it's fantastic to see that, and I think that the confidence we're playing with, the shape of the team allows him now not to have to just sit. I think there's a belief that the 2 guys standing behind him at centre half are a wee bit more stable and a wee bit more trustworthy, if you like, that he can step out from time to time, get into the penalty box, and he's shown he's a pretty decent finisher as well. The 2 goals, the goals he's kind of beat the Rangers were quite similar, but that was a really nice finish that I didn't actually really think he had in him.
Yes.
A lot of his goals when I was scoring for Dundee United were in and around the penalty area, timing his runs well. So Scott Robertson definitely played well, and he's been playing well for a number of weeks now. I think the goals are perhaps shining a bit of light on him particularly, but since he was one of the first players I think this season who started to turn his form a wee bit away from what he had shown in the previous seasons, he was one of the first guys that sort of turned around. I think he's got a great attitude, and I think that he definitely has been a catalyst for how we've been playing the last while. He's just completely reliable. No doubting guys like Alan have been superb, but it'll be hot and it'll be cold, but I really think Scott Robertson always puts in a performance.
I think that's the big thing you say about the goals kind of shining the light on him at the moment, but the big aspect to that is that this is when Hibs needed players to step forward with goals, because El Aligoui's still injured, Malonga was a loss when he went to the African Cup of Nations, and there's always been a question with Hibs with regards to goals coming from all over the park. And that's what we've had numerous conversations where we've said one of the big positives about Hearts is that goals can come from anywhere, so you can win matches from any one of 9 or 10 players. Hibs, there was always that thought that it was really concentrated on the guys up front, and maybe the odd goal from a Scott Allen, but not regularly. Whereas Robertson, over the last few weeks at least, from Rangers through Cowdenbeath to the weekend there, is establishing himself as a goal threat, despite really being the nominated holder in that midfield, and that's what Hibs need.
Well, I'd we'd had a chat, I can't remember what show it was now, about like who we wanted to sign in January, and I had said I wanted an actual holding midfielder to allow him to play that bombing on role. Maybe we don't need it now. Maybe he can kind of hold and bomb on. I'm not really sure, but that was always in his game. So it's great to see that now adding like tangible value to results and performances. So Robertson was definitely a really strong performer.
Anyone else that stuck out from the weekend?
I think Hallen and Fontaine, without being flashy, are just really, really solid at the moment. I think Falkirk might have been a bit of a sort of brain fart type performance, if you like, and it just didn't.
Maybe adjusting to the lack of grey to an extent.
I think the whole thing was just bizarre from front to back. Dylan McGeoch, I think, is a brilliant footballer. When we signed him, I thought we were getting like a wee sort of number 10 type guy, but I've been so impressed with his work rate and like his willingness to really mix it with other guys. Loves us getting stuck into challenges. Great touching the ball, technically a very good player. Like he has previously been a much more attacking sort of like 10 or a wee sort of kind of guy cutting in for the wings, but playing that central role, he's massively impressed me and very different from what I expected him to be.
It's interesting.
His return to the team has, I think, helped mask maybe Alan's slight drop in form, or not his drop in form, it's dropping, having those kind of match winning moments, or the assists and the goals and things like that. So he's been superb as well.
I think McGeoch's a really interesting one, because that's a position that quite simply he'll not get to play at Celtic. There's no way a young midfielder comes through and plays that right number 8 kind of position, right in the heart of the midfield, getting on the ball all the time, dictating the play. That's Scott Brown's job, but no one's getting that job. And even if you would have to be an incredible stick out or have know someone essentially to be able to get the influence to be put in that position and trusted at that level. So we have seen Dylan McGeoch as like a de facto right midfielder, thinking he doesn't look right there. That doesn't look like his position. But we've never, like you say, I think we've always just assumed that maybe he's one of those players doesn't really have a position. A bit of Sean Maloney,
he's an attacker,
a talented player, but might never fully realise his potential, because where's he actually best? Which is what we're seeing now, and it is down a level, and you have to temper your opinions because of that. But getting a run in the centre of the park,
so I think he just disappeared. He had that. He sort of came in at Celtic in a bit of a kind of bluster of he's going to be the next guy, and then he just disappeared for a couple of seasons. And I think that it might have been that he's kind of reinvented his style a wee bit and what type of midfielder or footballer he's going to be, because like I said, I can only remember him being a very attack minded sort of wee attacking midfielder, or a guy playing sort of in the wide areas. But what he brings to the side is the work rate and the graft that you get from Scott Robertson, but he's got a bit of that sort of guile and something a wee bit sort of different about him going forward. And the fact that he's taken penalties off the club captain twice this season, stuck them both away. He believes in himself as a player as well. The guy's essentially playing for a contract somewhere next season, whether it be at Hibs or wherever else it might be, but he's certainly playing with a point to prove. I don't think he particularly believes it's a point to prove to Celtic, but to the other people going, I'm good enough to play at a higher level.
Okay, 2 final personnel questions on Hibs then, before we move on to the Hearts chat. Firstly, we mentioned they are the 2 returning strikers, or imminently returning strikers. How does it look? How does the future look for Hibs when they come back in?
I think that it gives us an element of unpredictability in a good way. We've talked about unpredictability at different times of the season, and maybe it wasn't exactly something we're talking about in the most positive fashions, but we'll have different types of options, and that, like in Elagou, we'll have a target man who can play with his back to goal, who can run onto crosses, who's also a tidy footballer and he's mobile, and he'll bring a physical presence. Maybe it isn't there just now. We'll have Boyle, who's really, really fast, obviously not the most composed of finishers. Had another opportunity at the weekend, seemingly maybe got a wee touch off somebody's hand, and he's hit the post with a decent effort. But again, his pace is something that nobody else in the team brings.
Definitely.
Cummins is continuing to develop. He had a bit of a funny game at the weekend. He was trying shots all over, and he was getting a bit of tunnel vision. He wasn't bringing people into the game as much as he should possibly, but we're not going to get that sort of consistent all-round performance from him every single week. But his goals speak for himself. He's 19 and he's the top scorer in the division. That's absolutely superb. And Malonga is, I don't know, maybe a kind of odd combination of all those guys. He's got his moments where he's shown that he's an absolute dead-eye finisher. He's had a couple of like sort of bad misses as well. He's mobile, he's quick, he's also quite strong. No fantastic in there, but he has scored headers this season. So I think he brings an element to all those guys, but probably maybe slightly better than each of them at like different things. So I think there's a really good mix. Heffernan seems to be bringing more value to the side as a coach for Cummings apparently, rather than just playing. So okay, and obviously we've got this JJ,
who's true. You
played 5 minutes or so. So he's clearly he's got pedigree and he's got something to bring to this side. I can't tell you what it is, but I'm excited to see what he's all about.
Right, 2-word answer to wrap up that line of questioning then. Because I want to ask this because it's premature, but I want to see how it changes over the next couple of weeks. Right now, they're all fit and available. Who's your front two at Ibrox?
Cummings and Malonga.
Okay.
Even if Elgin fit, he's no match fit.
Final question then, a quick one. Thomas Tierney. A bit of a surprise, that signing.
Oh, absolutely.
But a positive one. I certainly remember him as a good player at Aki's. How does that change the Hibs lineup? How does it add to the Hibs lineup? Do you see him deposing Oxley quite quickly? Or?
I don't see why not. I mean, if the guy's still as good as we think he is, and it seems like he's been playing a lot. Like he went to CSKA Sofia, and was first choice for 2 years. And then he's been in Greece, played most of the season for them. I think he's played 12-13 times. So the guy's playing, he's match fit, he's sharp. He's been training with us for a couple of weeks apparently. And we do remember him as being a good keeper. So for me, there's quite a mixed opinion on Oxley, but I've not had too many sort of scares with him. But if this guy's going to be better, Oxley's a lone player. Like, we've got no real obligation to sort of insist that he plays. Like, we don't own him. Like, we can sort of send him back to a point, but it's important because the backup keeper just now is a 19-year-old who has no first team experience, who is still not. It's not a standout in the under-20s, to be honest. So I'm glad that we've got a guy in who's experienced, who's a good player, who's got pedigree, and there's absolutely no negativity whatsoever about that signing. It's really impressive and right out of nowhere as well. I'm enjoying that Hibs are now signing guys out of nowhere. You're not really hearing much chatter about it on the forums or anything. We're doing our business dead quiet.
It's indicative of a more effective club in general, as we were saying earlier. Okay, that wraps up our Hibs chat for this evening then, but we hope that you Hibbies listening will stay with us for the Jambo chat. It's not going to be quite as smug as in previous weeks.
Just before
possibly.
we move on, I was going to butt in there with the keeper that you're talking about, the 19-year-old, was it
Perntrau?
Apparently he went a bit mad in the development game.
He did. I
don't know if anything's happened with that, so I don't know if Tierney's kind of a good timing, perfect timing really, if he's going to be playing.
You're talking specifically about the mad moment where he borderline attacked the referee.
Yeah.
Right. I thought you were talking about the mad moments where he basically cost them 2 goals as well.
Didn't play very well.
The one where he ends up outside his penalty box for Keatings to lob him and then basically punches a Keatings free kick into the net.
I've hardly seen anything of him, but I've heard he's one of these keepers that seems to shrink when he goes for crosses. Brad Douglas-esque.
He certainly seemed a wee bit hot-headed at the penalty decision as well. But what we're going to do right now is just go a quick minute and a half's worth of adverts, and then we'll come back for 15 minutes solid Hearts chat. We will analyse this game that we've been putting off as long as possible, Ross, but we're going to have to do it eventually. Right, stay tuned on Monday Night Football. Thank you for staying with us on Radio Saltire and Monday Night Football. Right, Ross, we have got a lot of opinions to try and encapsulate into the next 15 minutes because there has been a hell of a lot of discussion of Saturday's game.
Certainly do.
More so than probably any other this season. What were your thoughts come 5 o'clock on Saturday?
Well, obviously I woke up to good news about the strips, the third strip. I don't know if Mikey won't know actually.
Ross is just delighted that he's getting his name on a strip.
Yeah, the Foundation of Hearts members are getting their names on. If you've got a certain amount of maroon points, the third strip next season, each individual name will be written on the top.
Sounds like it'll look dead classy.
Yeah, it should be pretty good, and I'm going to keep that obviously by about three or four different tops. Keep them
for your future bairns.
Obviously, going to the game, confident as usual. I mean, this losing malarkey is not really something that we have to deal with more recently. So
he's still managing to be smug, Mikey. He still is managing
it. Right? Why wouldn't I? A couple of drinks before the game. And then it just suddenly went a bit dark from there. Let's just say Falkirk are a different football team than I remember.
Well, funnily enough, it was literally dark for the first 45 minutes. How the floodlights weren't on, I've no idea. And you literally got that slight concern of like, are we able to turn the floodlights on? Because this could be a bit coming after the Ibrox debacle. If we then got a game postponed because we couldn't turn the floodlights on, it would have been a wee bit egg on the face for us.
Yeah, but after the first 20 minutes or so, we scored. Falk again, he was one of the only pass marks in the game, done exactly what he was brought in to do, held up the ball, passed it off, got the ball again, scored a goal. 1-0 up. We were all kind of looking at each other, just saying, here we go, but I wonder how many it's going to be this time. And then Falkirk just decided it wasn't going to be the case. I think they'd watched the Hibs performance against us, played exactly the same way, just ran at us like their life depended on it. The way we played with the 4-4-2 should have worked, but for some reason Boabin and Gomez just were not at the races. Boabin, more particularly for me, I think he had a really terrible game. And yes, Gomez, I know you're looking at me funny because Gomez gave the ball away, but I think Boabin over the whole had a worse game.
I mean, we're in a position where I know that there was a lot of fickle football supporters who potentially turned relatively quickly on individuals within the team. I'm in a position where I've been relatively critical of Gomez at points on this show against a backdrop of people universally praising him. I do think he's too slow to release the ball at times, and I do think sometimes that's a great thing, that calmness in midfield. Other times it reduces how effective we can be on the counter-attack, and it does play with fire a wee bit, which is what we saw at the weekend. I thought both struggled probably for half an hour up to half-time. I thought once we went 2-1 down, Boabin stood up. I thought we actually saw his performance noticeably improve, and I thought he shouldered a lot of responsibility that at that point some others were too happy to hand off. I thought we saw more of Boabin in an attacking sense once we went behind than we had all game. There was a couple of one-on-one with the keeper, where actually a couple of good McDonald saves where Boabin drilled a couple of shots in and they were blocked. One where he got in the box and they got caught under his feet. I thought that was indicative that it maybe wasn't his day from a footballing perspective, but I thought he shouldered the responsibility. Equally, you could probably say Gomez did, but probably should have taken slightly less because he should have released the ball earlier. I think we all agree with that. He had options either side. He could have moved it on, and he decided to dwell on the ball and got caught. Yeah, but I mean, going over the first half, it was 1-0 up, and then the stupid penalty. McGee showing his kind of naivety. Really, it was a daft challenge to make. The player wasn't running, towards goal. More in particular, it was going round the edge of the box.
When you see the replay of it, the ball doesn't get to another Falkirk player until it's 25 yards for goal. Well, that's the thing. That's how far away the ball was going. The angle of the run is literally taking him outside the box as well. I mean, if you delay the tackle a second, you can wipe him out outside.
He just flew in. I still want to kind of be in his head for that moment and go, what were you doing? Jordan McGee is someone that I do think we need to touch on a wee bit later when we get into the personnel debates as well, because I think there was wee issues there that we hadn't seen exposed previously. At least one more goal, I think. Yes, definitely, absolutely. To open it up more generally though, you touched already on the fact that Robbie has been known a wee bit for the tactics, and this 4-4-2 is what we've gone with, but we've praised Robbie a lot of the season for having, almost even when he didn't have to, he's gone with a plan B, or he's gone with a plan half an hour ago. He's changed just to see, as we were saying with Alan Stubbs earlier, to proactively to see, well, how does this one work, just in case I need it in future weeks. I can understand why he stayed with plan A at the weekend, because we've seen it work in other circumstances where Hearts have simply stayed with the 4-4-2, and the movement of the ball has ground the opposition down to the point where the last 20 minutes they've nothing left in their legs, and we score goals, which is why we've actually scored the highest percentage of our goals in kind of the last half hour of the game. That didn't happen at the weekend, and I think you can say hindsight's an exact science, but I think you could see that it wasn't going to play out in the same way, because quite simply our movement wasn't slick enough to really tire them out. That it was quite laboured, the movement of the ball. We weren't dragging them out of position in the same way that we have to other teams. Was the onus on Robbie to utilise one of the other plans that he's been working on this season? Well, I was saying as well to the guys around me, at half time we should have changed it. We should have taken off So and brought on Pallardo. That was my kind of thinking. We were all pretty much certain that was going to happen. Yeah, that didn't. Nothing changed, which I was very surprised at. I don't know if it was because it was Falkirk at home and maybe Robbie thought that he was shown maybe too much respect. I didn't see it that way. We should have reacted straight away to how the game was going, because we weren't playing our best going into half time. The penalty just rocked us, and we were 1-1. We weren't keeping the ball as long as we hoped. Falkirk were playing passes, left, right and centre. We couldn't get the ball back. As soon as we lost the ball, it was just stupid mistakes really, and their midfield pretty much ran the show going into half time. So for me, So had to come off, and because Zayfak was doing really well with that goal especially, and he done more than that. He held up the ball quite a few times and played people in, and he done slick 1-2 passing. There was a moment where a Falkirk defender was going towards the ball. He was miles back, but he just nearly caught him. We'd never seen a big guy like that run so fast in my life. That was a very kind of strange moment for me as well. But 4-5-1 it should have been at half time.
I think there's quite a big dilemma at the moment that I think we will need to work out as we get into the real title run-in, and I think it probably affects what you're saying there as to why it didn't happen. I agree with you that 4-5-1 was a definite option. I've said on this programme before that I think Miguel Pallardo is a million miles better than being our 12th man. I think we need to essentially find a way to get him in the team, and we're going to go on to us playing Football Manager to a wee extent and coming up with a solution going forward to maybe cure some of the problems that we've seen over the last couple of weeks. But we've had enough to get the win with individual quality. This week, not so much. But there's a real problem, I think, with the wingers at the moment, where there's a lot of time when we're moving forward up the wings, and the fullbacks are potentially looking for that out ball up the channel, and they're no there. The wingers have tucked inside. But then equally, from a defensive perspective, when you want the wingers there to provide protection, you want the wingers there to protect the fullbacks, they didn't really seem to give you presence there either. But they didn't really seem to be helping Gomez or Buabin either. And that's not a criticism specifically of Nicholson or Walker. I think they're both grafting. Walker, to me, looks fitter now than he has been in a long time. But I'm not quite sure where a lot of their work is being done, because it's not being done right down the wings, which from an attacking sense can sometimes be frustrating. But if they're getting joy in the centre, then fair enough. But there are points where I can't quite understand how we can be weak down the wings and still look outnumbered in the centre of the park. Can you shed any light on that? I mean, are you seeing anything?
Well, this is kind of, I've obviously mentioned before that I don't like Walker and Nicholson playing in the same team. I've always thought we've needed a bit of balance, and bringing in a kind of left midfielder, right midfielder for that purpose would have been perfect. And we've still got time; it's not going to happen, I don't think. But I think that's the type of player that we should be bringing in. In terms of Walker, more specifically, we've always known that he's not really going to provide a lot of cover for you. Eckersley in there at left back usually is better for him than McHattie. Obviously McHattie's injured, so with Eckersley coming in, Walker seems to, I don't know if he feels a bit more safer in the system himself, that he thinks he can stay up as much as possible. And with Nicholson, I mean, they were interchanging left and right, but the flicks that he was trying to do just weren't coming off. He was giving the ball away quite a lot of the times. That wasn't all his fault. There was midfielders there that weren't asking for the ball, and they were trying to hide, which was very surprising. There was even times at throw-ins where, how long did it take someone to throw the ball in? Yeah. They were all just looking at each other like, who's going for it and who's staying. It was exactly the same when the ball was in play. It was not coming off for us, and unfortunately Nicholson and Walker both suffered because of that.
Right, let's play fantasy football for a moment then before we circle back and we touch on a couple of individuals who we maybe need to pinpoint. How do you resolve the problems that existed on Saturday? What would you implement tactically for the next couple of games? Tactically,
if you're going to play Walker and Nicholson in the same team, it has to be 4-5-1.
Is there a problem there though, if you go, for instance, with Zayfak, is there a problem that, I agree with you that I thought he was a standout at the weekend, but one of his biggest attributes is not his mobility. He wants to get it in, hold it up and get bodies in and around him. As we say, that's not necessarily Walker or Nicholson's strength to tuck in. Is there then an argument to say that actually you play Keatings from wide to join up? Or that's my one worry with 4-5-1 is that if you go with Zayfik, who is the form front man at the moment, he could look extremely isolated at points in that system.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you to an extent. That he's just come into the team, and if he is played up front on his own, that it might suffer a little bit. I can see him being really our best striker, even better than so. And I think in a system where, as he said in an interview before, the player, what was it he said? The players come to me and I score, and stuff like that. In a 4-5-1, I think that he's capable of looking after himself up front, but as long as we've got a midfield three, maybe push Babin on a bit further and make him, not a number 10, so to speak, but to, try and get us forward as more and more throughout the game. And if it's not going the way that we want it to go, then change it. We've got a plan B, as we've said, and a plan C. Robbie may see it a different way. He wants a 4-4-2. But I think that if it's not going away, then change it. I don't think we should be really worrying about Zayfik up front on his own. I think he's capable.
I think, as a kind of sort of outside observer, I think there's been a lot of pressure perhaps being put on the wingers this season in terms of expectation on them. And the first probably 10-12 weeks of the season, on the show on Monday night, all we heard were you guys talking about how fantastic the wingers were playing. And it might be that maybe Falkirk and other sides deserve a bit more credit for maybe developing a way of playing that's starting to limit the effectiveness of the wide players for Hearts, because they were the wide players were what were making the Hearts the difference to everybody else in that counter attacking, but also even when you had dominating possession. So he's talking about this 4-5-1 and putting Blabin forward and stuff like. I thought Jason Holt was meant to be that kind of guy. He don't feel like the real sort of creative player. And to me, seeing I don't know, it smells a wee bit of is Levine really quite heavily involved in having Levine type players in the midfield. Is Holt not a Levine type player?
No, I didn't think it's anything to do with that. I think Holt's head was turned 2 years ago by a bid from Nottingham Forest and was never going to sign another deal. And ultimately, what's the point? It doesn't suit anyone for him. He's not a good enough player that if you're not going to make any money from him at the end and he's not going to commit his long-term future to the club, it doesn't make any sense for him to be involved if there are guys who are bought into where we're going and will be there longer term.
I get that.
Like Prince Babin, who's just signed a 2-year extension and stuff. I think it's as simple as that. To me, I think it's funny, Hearts supporters do have real high opinions of Jason Holt, but I think they have high opinions of the player that he could potentially be. I don't think he's ever actually shown that player yet in a Hearts jersey.
He's shown much a chance this season to sort of get, because bearing in mind the last couple of seasons he's been playing in pretty difficult circumstances for Hearts. This to me seemed like a season to really see what kind of player it was. Even if he was to leave, he's
only been in the team when we've needed to put him in there, and he has come off the bench quite a lot. He's scored a couple of important goals.
He seemed like the kind of guy who would do something different, but not necessarily one of the wide guys who does something really creative and exciting.
I know exactly what you mean, but I think the problem that I find with Holt personally is that we've seen him develop over the last 3 years, and I still don't know what his best position is.
And unfortunately,
that's a frustration, because you do think he's a number 10 player, and then you put him there, but he doesn't. I know he scored against Rangers, but he doesn't carry a consistent goal threat. He doesn't really get beyond the front man, and then you think that's not really a player that tends to actually thrive in Scottish football. An industrious number 10 type. Yeah. You need a goal threat from that
maybe
position.
Maybe kind of handling-esque at Hibs as well.
Possibly,
handling coming back from a striker, and obviously Holt kind of moving forward from a midfielder. I just thought he was maybe a kind of piece in the jigsaw.
I don't think so. I agree with Ross. Long term, going forward over the next few weeks, I would actually go to something closer to the Hibs model at the moment, because I think ultimately, and we've mentioned it a few times here, we're currently playing, as you say, Mikey, a system that's heavily reliant on wingers, although we're not playing them as conventional wingers, which is what makes the system look a wee bit strange and unbalanced at times, I think. But I think we're overly reliant on 2 of 3 players, because the fact is, especially with guys that young, it's easy for 2 of them to be out of form, and you're forced to play one because, we play 4-4-2. And we've seen that at points. Billy King at the moment has just dropped out. I don't know if he was carrying a knock from the wee derby, but he wasn't even on the bench at the weekend. So you then, Walker and Nicholson simply have to play.
But at the same time, Holt is coming to a Hearts team where unfortunately he's not in the top 3 or 4 best midfielders, We've got Boabin, we've got Gomez, who are better players.
But
Payardo's a better player.
So that leads on
Undoubtedly.
exactly to what I would do with the system, which is go with not so much a diamond, but I would go with a flatter 3 and then a 1 in front. So I would play Payardo kind of in the centre, Gomez to the left, Boabin to the right. I would then have a free roll, a Brian Laudrup type free roll that they can play number 10 if they want, but equally they can go left wing, they can go right wing. So either Nicholson or Walker there. So I know that Nicholson struggles sometimes in the number 10 position, but it's not a number 10 in this system. You can be a right winger if you want, if you're getting joy out the left back. You can be a left winger if you want, if you're getting joy at the right back, because the midfield will anchor that and hold that solid with a 3. And then I think you still keep the 2 up front, which doesn't risk Zeefuik becoming too isolated. And you've also got Keatings, because at the moment Keatings came on again, made an impact, scored a goal. You probably have to get him in the team at the moment, just because he seems to be carrying that wee threat that maybe others don't.
That's like shape also does allow, like, if you're playing your wide man more kind of central for your fullbacks,
exactly, because we have got fullbacks
who like to get forward.
That do push
it could be that system might suit McHattie more than it does Eckersley as well.
It would suit Patterson undoubtedly to bomb up and down that wing, and there's no reason for me that he couldn't do a job similar to the one that Gray's doing. Yeah, he might take a wee while to develop into it, because Patterson can be a wee bit more of an erratic player, but certainly I think that kind of system at the moment would get our best players on the park, or at least our most experienced players who can manage a game out. And because I think at the weekend, and this is where maybe we come back to Jordan McGee conversation as we start to wrap up the conversation. Jordan McGee's a brilliant talent. We asked some questions about him early in the season about his physique and things like that, and I actually think he's answered most of those. But there was a question about his mentality on Saturday, because he made, as we've said, a pretty horrendous misjudgment for the penalty. But I thought from that moment on, his head was gone. I thought you saw it the last 10 minutes where you wanted him just to play football. There was a couple of times where he had a pass on into the midfield. There was a couple of times where you just needed him to knock the high diagonal, and he just offloaded it to the guy next to him, because he didn't want to take any responsibility at that stage, because he clearly just didn't feel capable of playing a part. Which you can't. If we're going into the run that we're going into, which we are, because it's not, like Mikey mentioned earlier, it's not catastrophic yet. This is one defeat, and Scott's written a really eloquent blog, well, eloquent for him at least, on our WordPress site, which is mondaynightfootball.wordpress.com, that asking for perspective, not panic. You should get on there and read it if you're at all interested in the Hearts' position at the moment, and the fans' reaction to the game at the weekend. But that's the big thing, that where we go from here, we simply need characters who can react to these situations and keep it all in perspective and keep the same level of responsibility that they had before. That's the positive thing with the fact that it was Gomez that made the mistake for the final goal. He'll turn up next week and he'll be a different player. We know that Morgaro Gomez will be the exact same Morgaro Gomez, because as a kind of 29-year-old bit of a journeyman, he's made those mistakes before, and he'll get on with it, he'll keep it in perspective. Jordan McGee didn't seem to have the ability to put that in perspective at that moment in time. Is that a concern about his role in the squad this season? Because he is in front of Brad Mackay at the moment.
Well, he's wanting to be a centre-back, which is fair enough, but I think he needs to try and claim a right back position, more importantly, because as we mentioned on air before, his physique isn't the greatest. He has mentioned publicly that he's going to work on that. In that centre back position, you're going to be looked at more as one of these players that's going to see the ball a bit more. The defensive performance of the whole team is going to be more on your two centre backs rather than your wing backs. I think it's a bit too early for us to demand that he's going to be brilliant every time he comes into a centre-back role.
Of course.
Patterson, unfortunately, is doing really well at the moment for McGee to claim that right-back role for himself. So put it down to his age at the moment. I have no doubt that he's going to be a fantastic football player. I think most of the Hearts fans could see that as well. It's just unfortunate that he seems to be affected by any mistakes at the moment. Quicker than maybe his teammates, and we have got a lot of young players still. We seem to forget that these guys are still really young. I mean, Ostock's 22, but I can't put that much blame on the players if they're making one or two mistakes. Unfortunately, for this type of game, he made a couple that cost us.
Yeah,
McGee reminds me a lot of Paul Hanlon when he was coming through, and the physique, wee bit of rashness, the fact he can play a bit of fullback, play centre half, relatively comfortable on the ball, and from a Hearts perspective, you're probably just hoping that he maybe pushes on further than Hanlon has, and especially that physical side of it, because Hanlon, apart from the fact he's never grown massively, he doesn't seem to have that natural aggressive streak in him. He still made some rash tackles, so I don't think the tackle and McGee made necessarily says that's an aggressive centre half. So I think there's maybe parallels between Hanlon at that age coming through.
I think it's a pretty good comparison in the context of the weekend as well, because I think Hanlon sometimes is a player that you look at and think you're a wee bit too much a shrinking violet for that position. You want a massive character there, and that's what Fontaine seems to have brought a wee bit, is that he is a big, dominant, experienced guy. And you look at Hanlon and you think, even when you're Fontaine's age, you still probably won't be that character.
That kind of guy.
Aye, the guy that will dominate a situation and just take over because I'm here, it's sorted. But that's what we need. That's what you need from a centre half.
It could be potentially just playing the sort of kind of heavy devil's advocate here. Some teams might watch that performance at the weekend there and go, well, whatever position that lad is playing, we're going to go for him. Whether he's playing at full back and maybe out of his comfort zone, or if he's playing centre half, stick like a sort of big battering ram up against him, elbow him all day long, foul him, stamp on his feet and stuff like that, and see psychologically if he's got that bounce back.
That can work for you if you get him on the training ground, you work on his confidence, you build him up, and the next game that he has to play comes out and he shrugs it off as if it was nothing and gets back to the Jordan McGee that we've seen previously. Then they're focusing on the wrong man, and that's what you need. But yeah, I agree, if he does let it affect his confidence going forward, if he lets it fester and it becomes an issue, then yeah, I mean,
big challenge for Nielsen to see how he manages him.
Ultimately, I think that one's fairly easy because Ozturk comes back in. It's as simple as that. Ozturk's served the suspension now, he'll come back in, and
is that damaging his confidence? It could be like sort of viewed as is he being dropped for that performance or because Ozturk's fit again?
I think he'll be able to keep it in perspective that he would have been dropped anyway, that he's not part of the first choice.
I think it all goes down to who's next to him as well. If Stephen Presley was next to him, I think he'd be even better as he is. But unfortunately, he's not got the finished article next to him just now. Danny Wilson, really good football player, but he's not the finished article yet. He's still a young player, and unfortunately, he's had a lot of the responsibility being captain, and he's still 23. He's in the same kind of position as maybe McGee, but just a wee bit further on in development. So maybe McGee can look at Wilson and say, see how his career's kind of paved, and he'll maybe go down to the Premiership or the Championship because he's a brilliant footballer. I have no doubt about it. McGee's going to be fantastic. It just really, maybe it's his mentality rather than anything he has to sort out in his physique.
But that does come back to a larger point with Hearts, a point that we spoke about right at the start of the season, and probably where we'll leave this discussion. Hearts went with a specific model in the summer, with a couple of noticeable exceptions, mainly in the centre of the park. Hearts went with getting as talented players as possible, who fitted in with a model of younger players who can come here, improve, and then either they carve out a career at Hearts where they can play for 10 years, or they move on and make the club money, which is probably a more likely scenario. With that in mind, we did sacrifice going for... There was a lot of people calling for, that experienced warhorse type player. Get a 36-year-old centre-half in there just to really... He puts his head in where it hurts and he leads these players by example. We didn't go for that. We went with cultured football players, or as cultured as you can get in the First Division, and it's paid dividends so far. Is there any question that we might miss that type of experienced leader maybe in the team over the title race? Because that is the only thing probably that you can argue that Rangers have got that Hearts haven't. I think if we talk about individual quality in the squad, we've seen this season the myth exposed that Rangers didn't really possess that. If they did, it would come out when they played Hearts, it would come out when they played Hibs. But what they do have is guys who know how to manage a situation, know the skullduggery, know how to work a referee. Is there any concern on your part, Ross, that Hearts don't have that?
Not at the moment. I think next season would be a more of a problem if we don't bring in a centre-back like that. But at the same time, we've kind of went on not a tirade, but we've had a go at some of the Hearts players for the performance. I'm still taking positives from it. We did have a lot more of the ball in Falkirk. It took 2 fantastic goals for them to beat us. We should have had a penalty. It was a stonewaller. There's things that I will still take as positives from the game, even though it's our first defeat. It's not the end of the world. We've not been beaten in the league since March, so it's nearly been a year. As a Hearts fan, that's... You take that all day. And if someone said to me at the beginning of the season, you're going to go undefeated until January, end of January, would you take that? Yeah, of course. I've seen the cringy stuff on Facebook of bubbles bursting and all that, but if that's a bubble bursting, I'd take that every day of the week.
The big thing as well when it comes to perspective is that it's easy to look at that result, and I was talking about it with Rangers supporter earlier. It's easy to look at that result from a Hearts perspective and say, oh, that's 10 points now. Was 13 points at the start of the day. It's now 10. As we've said, it's far from guaranteed with this Rangers team. But equally, I expect, but I also, it may not happen exactly as we think, but I fully believe that Hibs will go to Ibrox and win. In which case, it's still 13 actually. As long as we do the business over the next few games, that reinstates that 13-point lead there. And likewise, when they go to Dumfries, as we've said about Hibs pegging them back, when they go to Dumfries, I'm not confident the Rangers will suddenly learn how to win. There's loads of these games still to come, and that's where perspective comes in. Yes, the defeat now influences how Hearts fans look at the next games. They now look at the Alloa game as thinking, oh, well, that's a really tricky tie on a dodgy surface. And whereas if we had beat Falkirk at the weekend, we'd be thinking, bandwagon keeps on rolling. Again, the 2 ties against Livy are starting to think, oh, well, 2 ties back to back, they might suss us out and that. But ultimately, it's still the same Hearts team. It's still the same Hearts team that have, gone undefeated in 20 of the 21 games. That's affecting our perception. It's not affecting how the game's actually going to play out. From a Hibs perspective, Mikey, just to wrap up, what was the reaction to the Hearts defeat?
Let's not laugh at people who were sort of kind of walling in the glow of it and quite enjoying the fact that it's now done. This unbeatable thing's gone. Obviously, it's not been crowed about anyway in the same kind of way as it has been when it was the old George Burley unbeatable situation. But the fact that it came on the same weekend that we won a tricky match, in the way we did, in the sense that it came against Falkirk, who we got a little bit sort of the mickey taken from us by pretty various Hearts fans for chucking a 2-goal lead against Falkirk, a bunch of young laddies, so on and so forth. What's not to like about it, let's be honest. It was a good weekend to be a Hibs fan. We gained a lot of belief, we gained on Rangers numerically, and there was, I don't think any Hibs fans ever viewed Hearts as having a kind of invincibility, but it's gone. They were beaten by a side who weren't Rangers or Hibs, so you might expect them to lose to at some point. So it might give other teams confidence to go, well, Falkirk are that much better than us. Are we capable at home of taking something off Hearts? Maybe not at Tynecastle regularly, but it was funny.
When we talk about perspective and we talk about fans having knee-jerk reactions and that kind of thing, from a Hibs viewpoint, do you still look at this in every way as being Hearts League? Or is there any
this has to become sort of spectacular for it not to be Hearts' championship.
So even from an opposition perspective, so would you say at this point that the opposition potentially have more perspective, that they're looking at it saying, but it's just a blip, whereas Hearts fans will maybe now have flashbacks to 86 and all that kind of thing, and the baggage that comes with being a football supporter and so close, so near yet so far, as we've said. Whereas opposition fans are still looking at it going, but you're 10 points clear of a dodgy Rangers team.
I think any Hibs fans who are talking about it in the sort of 86 Albert Kidd sort of capitulation are saying it tongue in cheek. Yeah. I don't think there's genuinely a sort of relatively sane Hibs fan sitting here going, it's going to happen again, it's happening again. It's that football banter and that kind of sort of cheeky chat that we have between each other after certain results. I personally don't see Hearts chucking away this lead. it'd be hugely interesting if they lost in a couple of games in the next 5 or 6. Because then things would get interesting, dependent on how Hibs and Rangers countered those results. But realistically, at the moment, I don't see it having a overall detrimental effect. But that's not to say that it won't, and it's not to say that they won't have a bit of a chuckle if it does happen again at some point in the next few weeks. And it'll be like, if it does, if Hearts do lose again in the next 2 or 3 weeks, then you might just start to see if the players do have the bottle for it. Like, there's probably not a lot of guys in that Hearts dressing room that have won a promotion or won like a cup or anything like that. So it'll be interesting to see who in that group has the mentality to go, boys, we're still well ahead. We've still got, like, this is still in our hands, and see who it is. If there's somebody in the group that can do that, like, there's Nielsen's going to be able to do that. Levine can do that. Like, there's other guys around the club who can do that, but the guys in the park, are those guys got it? So that'd be the biggest test. If there's another defeat in the next couple of weeks, who in the dressing room? And I don't see it being Danny Wilson personally, even though he's got the armband on. Who in the dressing room is going to be the guy that talks out and goes, "This is fine, guys." So that's.
Let's get Rudy's catch on back.
Am I saying, is that my hope that what happens? How can you possibly say?
Okay, it's fascinating to get other supporters' perspectives in it, because I do think that they are able to look at it. As we've said numerous times, Hearts supporters still saying, "Oh, we'll take one game at a time." And you would, if you looked at that and that was the Portuguese second division, you'd be saying, they're absolutely annihilating that league at various points in the season. You would have, as an outsider, you would have said there's no doubt about where that league's going. Whereas you look at it, sometimes the maroon tinted glasses, all you can see is positive Hearts stuff. Other people, as we said, with the PTSD element of football, other people have had their fingers burnt previously, they're not getting carried away, and they're overly cautious. And I think that's what, certainly within the 4 stands of Tynecastle at the weekend, you felt that coming through, that people had gone the opposite way. Rather than getting carried away, people had gone to the point where we've lost this lead and you're like, no, we've lost one game, which still doesn't take us anywhere near the games that all our closest rivals have lost. But yeah, very interesting. We will see how it plays out. Very quickly, guys, just to wrap up, because we've gone slightly later than we intended to. But I think for good reason, because we had specific things to talk about. But very quickly, predictions from everyone. I'll even chip in this week, seeing as we've got the smaller panel. Hibernian versus Wraith Rovers at Easter Road, Saturday 3 o'clock kick-off. Mikey, what's your prediction?
4-0.
Right.
3-1 for Hibs.
Right.
With Nadi scoring.
And that's what I was going to say. 2-1 Hibs, I'm going with Nadi scoring. I think it might be a wee bit ropier, because I think Wraith Rovers are a bit of a poorer team and will simply, as we said earlier, will come to take the point. And I think there may be points where Hibs will maybe struggle to break them down, and you'll get those wee flashbacks to, oh no, this again, we thought we had turned this corner. But I think they will eventually prove that they have turned that corner.
More better players in the side than there was at the start of the season. McGeoch and Allen and guys who came out on pick at Allentown match fit. We've got a selection of strikers that we maybe didn't have at the start of the season. So, and
I think that'll definitely come to pass. But I think if Wraith Rovers can keep it tight for a period of the game, there's as we said at Tynecastle, there's always those certain fans will bite a wee bit quicker than others, and it'll start to get a wee bit nervy. But I do think that Hibs now have the personalities and have the swagger in the squad.
And I think that last result as well as evidence to the fans. Like, it was 0-0 against Green and South, and we did the opposite of what we usually do in the second half, and we turned it up and we got the result. So hopefully that's what's taken from it, and the fans just sort of bite their tongue for a wee bit longer and go, hopefully we've got this, and it will happen.
Okay, Alloa versus Hearts at the Indodrill Stadium. That's a 5:30 kick-off, because I believe it's on BBC Alba. Ross,
2-0 Hearts. I think it's going to be a tricky game. I'm not going to say otherwise, but I think we will still win. I think we'll still stick with the 4-4-2 as well, and we'll have enough to score a couple of goals against them.
It'll be interesting to see if we train on the park again this week, like we did last time. That incredible bit of managerial genius of just playing on the park 3 days before the game. Well, it'll be interesting to see if we feel the need to do that again. Last time we really changed our game when we went to Alloa because of the surface. I think we noticed in the training session previous to the game that the ball held up quite a lot. It checks quite a lot on that dodgy old AstroTurf that Alloa have got. So I think we played Dale Carrick purely with the idea of knocking the ball in the channels and him being able to get in behind them with his pace. It'll be interesting to see if we do a similar thing this time. I think we'll win. I think it might be a bit similar to last time where it's a bit of a grind, because I just didn't think that surface is conducive to really playing very good football. It's too slow, holds up too much, as we saw I think when they played Rangers and they put about 3 times worth of the rubber pellets on the park. So it might be a black surface that we turn up to this time. Mikey, what's your perspective? I realise I never said a score. I might go 1-0 again. 1-0 for Hearts.
Well, I was going to go 1-0. I'll go 2-0. 2-0 Hearts. I was going to say 1-0 Hearts.
Okay, so we think Hearts will grind it out, probably just on the basis of maybe a slightly more solid defensive performance.
Performance of champions, some might say.
Some might say, not us, because we don't count our chickens before they've hatched. Right, okay, we are going to wrap up there. Thank you for joining us, guys. Thank you for joining me.
No problem.
Cheers.
Because these smaller panels, the show really would have been a disaster if your bus hadn't turned up, Mikey. We may have, Ross and I may have struggled to get 20-25 minutes on Hibs Queen of the South.
Could have done a Mikey impression, maybe, or my corner impression, but that's more physical than anything else.
Okay, we're going to leave you. Thank you very much for staying tuned. Enjoy a night of music on Radio Saltire. One last thing before we go, I want to say a congratulations to Callum Roberts, who was our competition winner. He got his signed Ryan McGowan jersey at Tynecastle on Saturday. Hopefully that brightened an otherwise fairly gloomy day. So you can get on the Twitter if you want to see a picture of Callum cheesing with his Ryan McGowan shirt. I think Ross has got one more thing before we go.
Yeah, I just want to say congratulations obviously to Ryan McGowan getting a deal at Dundee United. I'm not taking it personally, I still love you, but we all move on, and I'll find someone else.
Okay, and we hope, as I said to him on Twitter, we hope to see him at both Tynecastle and Easter Road next season in the SPL. That would be positive. Obviously, slightly differing reactions that he may get at both stadiums, but the fact that he would be there would mean that this season has ended successfully for both of us. So on that note, we will leave you. Thank you for joining us on Monday Night Football. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers.